Okay, go to the next slide. This just illustrates, okay, actually go back to the previous slide is to recap something. This is the situation this one. And I use this as kind of a model. So here we have a Latina physician. Now, most of the medical students that we have at UCLA, probably 80 to 90%, are the second generation children of immigrant parents from that last wave of immigration, which, by the way, was not the first. It was the 8th wave of immigration from Mexico and Central America to California in 250 years. They come on about 30-year cycles. So they've lived usually in the barrios. They lived with hardworking immigrant parents. That's just, your child, you grow up, that's just what is. However, as they start to go to high school and then to get their bachelor's, then to medical school, then to their residency, they become increasingly aware of all these media stereotypes about Latinos and health. And so the question off in their mind is, well, this is what I read about. It's in the peer-reviewed papers. It's in the scientific literature. Here's my experience. Maybe, my family was weird because we don't look like what's in the media. Then her colleague, this older white male, all he knows about Latinos is what he sees in the media and reads in the peer-reviewed literature based on that. Now he's going to go and make decisions. So our goal for leadership, either for research, teaching, or just practice patterns, is making sure that this young Latina physician understands and reflects on her lived experiences and brings them into the research lab, brings them into the exam room, brings them into the boardroom, certainly with a database to counter it. Otherwise, basically this ignorance that most of our colleagues have, they just have stereotypes and they firmly, truly, and you've probably seen it, your faculty, colleagues, teaching just outright racist stereotypes as if it were fact. Latinas, oh, they don't feel pain as much. You hear that, all sorts of things. Okay, now to the next slide. And this is the book that we wrote, 4 of us. 3 of us were at Berkeley in the 60s. Castelo de la Rocha, Jose Joel Garcia, and su servidor. And Diana would have been with us, but she was doing stuff in New York at the same time. Diana Bontan, Puerto Riqueña. She moved out to California in the 80s. So this is actually a history of the early years of the Chicano health boom, we call it, from 1965 to 1985. When the predecessor to LMSA was started up, that was the National Chicano Health Organization back in 1970, and it changed names and everything over the past years. A lot of the community clinics, a lot of the research centers, a lot of the health policy, particularly as you might have seen that California is kind of an outlier in health policy, particularly since the last 5 years. We're now actually going to expand Medi-Cal coverage to undocumented from the age 50 and up, but that's because of the political stuff that happened. The foundations which were laid during this period. And we stood on the shoulders of giants, by the way. There were generations before us. So this is an interesting book. I would suggest you get it. It's published by Altamed. And just find out and this is just the California version, by the way. Every state has its version. I remember when we set up the National Chicano Health Organization, we went to New York and we were talking to, I can't remember the guy's name, I believe the last name was Santiago, who had just set up the Boricua National Health Association. So we said, well, that's great. Let's join forces. Sure. So if we did, what do we call it? And so the New York, so you guys should join the Boricua National Health Association. No, you should join the Chicano Health Association. So we had a big fight. Then the next year we went to American Public Health Association in Miami, met the Cubans. So we had this big fight. What do we call ourselves? That's a whole nother story. Each state could write a similar book. We've been in every single state. Each state has its own Latino story, its own Latino history. So I would recommend this if you want to get kind of an understanding of what was Fernando doing. We interviewed Fernando. We interviewed about 200 veteranos of that period. And this is actually a database book. We use those interviews as the basis for this book. So with that, thank you very much. Now I'll be quiet.
Thank you. Okay, so let's get going with the questions because I'm starting to see some raised hands. I think the first hand I saw was by Renee. Is that correct?
I think JP actually had his hand up before I did.
JP already spoke. JP, put your hand down. Go ahead, Renee.
Okay. I just, I think this is so great. I feel like, one of the common themes that I see coming up is like we're all together and we're all empowered. And I feel like one of the comments I want to make is that when I've come up to talk about different things with the higher ups, one of the things that comes up is that because I'm a light-skinned Hispanic, that I don't really understand different Hispanics because of the color of my skin. So I set out apart, and that I have privilege because I'm a light-skinned Hispanic. And I feel like that hasn't really been too much addressed. And I'm seeing a lot of colors, and I see light-skinned Hispanics here. And so I'm just curious, what are some of the reactions that people have had, or how do they, when that comes up and it's an issue, how is that addressed?
That's a great question. So I'm wondering who on the panel would like to address that question?
Well, that question was raised in the 1849 California Constitutional Convention. We had been part of Mexico, and in 1810, Mexico abolished slavery and declared racial equality and citizenship. That was the law of the land here in California. 1848, boom, here comes the United States that protects slavery and denies citizenship to non-whites. Oh, we had this little epistemological tussle there. And that was the first and last time Latinos were ever proportionately represented in California. And because Latinos were there, the California Constitution was there. And these issues of race, citizenship, slavery were argued. And California's Constitution, first of all, continued Mexico's abolition of slavery. We came in as a free state, provided property rights for married women, and non-whites could become citizens, but they had to thread a needle. And we came in as a bilingual state. The threading the needle was that all other state constitutions limited citizenship to white males, by the way. Women didn't have it. So the question was, well, what race are Latinos? And so what the Anglos said, well, you white Mexicans, you can be citizens, but the ones who aren't white can't be. And all Latinos bound together said, hey, under Mexican law, no race was excluded from citizenship, and they stood firm. They stood firm because, you know, when a Latino baby is born, we don't know what color their skin is going to be. We don't know what their hair is going to be like. We don't know what their eyes is going to be like. It's sort of random. And yes, people will respond to you maybe a little bit differently, but hey, somos familia. And besides that, when people start this hair splitting, because in the US racial epistemology, races are naturally occurring things. I mean, they occurred according to this model way back. They're naturally occurring, whether God created them or whatever else, and that they're mutually exclusive. No white is ever black, no black is ever Indian, no Indian is ever Asian, and none of them are ever Latino. And internally homogeneous, they're somehow all the same. But you look at the DNA, look at the 1,000 Genomics Project, the races don't exist. Wherever you put that line, that so much percentage of this is totally, completely arbitrary and driven by racial narratives. So again, I prefer to say we are Indo, Afro, Oriento, Ibero, Americanos, somos Americanos, y ya.
Thank you, thank you. So before we get to Ida, I see Fern had a question. Did you want to pose your question or comment?
Oh yeah, hi, thank you. So I am half Hispanic from El Salvador. My mom's Salvadoran, and half Taiwanese. So I'm assistant dean of medical student research at LSU Health Sciences Center. And as far as doing research, there were several studies. I'm always trying to explain to people what you guys were talking about, the difference between race and ethnicity, because recently there was a study by the Department of Ophthalmology that was sent to the whole campus. And then I wanted to help out and participate. And they asked, choose one. You can only choose one: Asian or Black or white or Hispanic, or choose not to answer. So I contacted the researcher. I said, you know, like, I would like to answer. I don't want to I choose not to answer. So yeah, so it's like they said that, you know, they have to reformat the whole study, I guess. You know, they can't change it at this point. So there's still a lot of education that needs to be done.
Oh my God. They have a bad study. They know it's bad. They're going to go ahead and do it. Oh,
yeah, I know. And that was like, I talked to the resident was conducting the study, and then I talked to the resident and his mentor, and I was trying to explain it. So yeah, I mean, I'm just saying that there's a lot of still trying to educate the difference between Hispanic and like the race and ethnicity question. So yeah, I'm trying to promote this.
Read the paper that Seda put in. We're addressing those topics exactly in mortality records, death records.
Here's the thing you say to them. You're doing bad science.
Yes,
Right. Yeah.
absolute bad science.
The issue becomes the reality of the world. Science is to understand the reality of the world. Their reality is wrong. And from those, as David and others have pointed out, from those wrong assessments, we get poor information, poor action.
Exactly.
Again, this is where you all have the opportunity. The time is now to change theories, to change how data is collected. I recently got a survey from big pediatric organization asking for board members. And I had written a survey for them 5 years ago about diversity. They listed all the racial groups, but they didn't list Latino. And I just couldn't believe it. How does a academic organization, the top of the nation, do something like that? It's because they're okay with poor science. We need to change that.
And there's a lot more, I know I make up a small percentage of the population. I know that but I know in different countries, I know there's Asian Hispanics. I know in Peru and different countries. So I know that there's of course, different race and different races and who are Hispanic, who identify Hispanic. So yeah, I have been, I'm part of the Diversity, Equity, and Inclusion Committee. So I've been trying to, I have been explaining to people, to researchers, this concept. Do you guys have any kind of reference that you can recommend? If you can put them in
If we could put those, if we could put those in the chat. We have a few minutes left, and I know we have two hands up. So thank you so much. I want to give Aida an opportunity, and I know Aneda has her hand up too.
Hi, can you hear me? Great, perfect. So I'm a foreign medical graduate. I was born in Mexico. I went to the UNAM for med school and came to the US for residency and have been here since then. And, recently I have been part of diversity committees, and we're trying to set up priorities for what we want a diversity leader to do for our pulmonary division. And the topic came up that some people kind of expressed that because I was a foreign medical graduate, I was not, I guess, Latino enough, or like that, what Dr. Hayes was alluding to, of all these like different double imposter syndrome, where you are maybe like, where people were like, why do you have a say in this diversity conversation if you were born somewhere else? And so I was just kind of wanting to maybe help me understand, because I do, part of me actually thinks, well, they have a point. Like, you see how that is very confusing. So I would love to kind of hear some of your thoughts on that.
Well, we're finishing up a paper. We're writing on the 250-year presence of Latino medicine and science in Alta California. We've been here for 200 years. We brought basically Western science to California, and that happened earlier to different states. New Mexico, 200 years before that. So we're part of that larger web of science. And by the way, the surgeons, they were Spanish Naval Service surgeons in 1770. They were highly prepared. They were not barber surgeons. They studied physics and calculus and biology and anatomy. They were studying the equivalent of today's material. So we're part of that world. Don't forget, we're all part, all of us, almost all of us here from the US, from the Caribbean, New Mexico, or Mexico and Central America. We're part of the Virreinato de Nueva España. And of course, there was the indigenous underneath that. There were Africans along with it. There were blacks with Columbus. There were blacks with Cortez, and there were blacks as slaves. And just 30 years later, the treasure fleet from Manila arrived every year, bringing people from China, Japan, Korea, India, you name it, Indonesia. So that's why I say we are Indo, Afro, Oriental, Ibero-Americanos. We can figure out who the heck we are. I'm not going to let anybody determine and define who I am or who we are. I will do that. Thank you, at least for me, and you all do it for yourself. We push back. Database.
Absolutely. And Ayla, you're next.
Sure. Thank you, Laura. I mean, great discussion. We could be here all day. Crucial conversations, but great discussion. Very, very important. But I can tell you that, you know, as a Latina, a Cuban who was here in 1960, who was placed in a Catholic school with all nuns, Irish nuns, you know, I'm light hair, fair skin. My grandparents are from Spain, but I was born in Cuba. And I would go back to my house and I would ask my grandmother, they're asking me where I'm from because I couldn't speak English. And so my grandmother said, you tell them you're from Cuba. And I would get the question, you don't look Cuban. And then I would answer back, what does a Cuban look like? You know, because that was the first question. But I can tell you that also we have to work for each other and we have to continue this discussion and we have to bring it at the forefront. But very important as a mother and as a grandmother, it is important to instill that tradition in those generations that will be after us. And one of the greatest, I think one of the greatest gifts I received this week is that I have a daughter who lives in Naples, of all places, who is married to another Cuban American. They were both born here of Cuban parents, us, and they were highlighted in a magazine because they just opened up their business in Naples. And the title is Proud Cuban Americans. And they were born here. And that is instilled now in my grandkids. So I think that we do not only have the responsibility amongst us as colleagues, but we also have a responsibility within our family. And I can tell you, JP, that my granddaughter, 2 years old, will dance salsa. That I can tell you.
So Eneida, as a half Cuban, you are very Cuban to me. So I don't know what they're talking about. But I do, before we wrap it up, I want to give Dr. Silva a chance to chime in as well, given her unique experiences, right, as a Latina in Puerto Rico. So anything you want to share, Dr. Silva, to wrap it up for us?
I think that all our experiences together come about, and there's so much there, so much richness, so much that we can all learn from each other. And coming from Puerto Rico, every time I meet my colleagues, Hispanic, Latino, I learn from their experiences, and I think that our history will prevail. I do think that. I think that it will be even bigger as we do the research, as we do the mentoring, which is so important, as we open those doors and we keep them open. It's just not just opening them. We have to keep them open, right? And as we invite others to come with us and we help them understand that it might be hard, but it's not impossible. And it is our social responsibility to keep doing it so that we, as a race, even though it's not still at this point seen that way, but we are, as a race, we are together and we keep doing what we were doing and doing it better for others to come. So I do believe we will be bigger and better, and there's going to be more of us in academic medicine because that is one of our roles and what we're here to do.
Wonderful. Thank you. So we are at time. So I'm going to wrap things up really quickly so that everyone has an opportunity to take a 15-minute break and get a cafecito before the 9:45 session. But a couple of things that I recall, we had a robust conversation, but I remember a couple of things. We are the big dogs. Beat them with the data, and don't let anyone tell you you do not belong and that you're not Latino. So just a few things that I remember. Thank you all for joining us for this session. We have learned a lot from our panelists. I certainly have, from all of their wisdom, personal stories, and all the tips they have shared. They have provided additional tips in the data slide, in the slides that will be shared with you, as well as the data that they shared today. So you'll have an opportunity to review those tips. I hope everyone continues to enjoy the conference. Thank you to everyone who participated today, and we will see everyone in about 15 minutes. Thank you.
Great
Laura,
work. We probably could have kept going.
Yeah. So for anyone who wants to skip cafecito, just because I know it's a very unique occasion, not to take people away. I saw Anada shake her head. If
people need their coffee, JP. I need it.
No, I know, but look at the great people on this call. I mean, you have the new Chief Diversity Officer of the National Academies. Are you trying to say that you're going to be on the phone with everyone whenever we call? Okay. And you have,
Yes, I am.
you have Dr. Mendoza and Dr. Hayes Bautista and Dr. Silva and Dr. Holdan. So if anyone wants to continue to pose questions for the next 5 to 10 minutes and the panelists are okay, you just pour the coffee while still speaking.
Let me just add that, one of the things I've learned over my years, family histories is really important. That defines who you are. This is our family history. Sometimes you don't ask. I didn't know that my mother was deported until my daughter told me, because she spoke to her and she was 90 years old. That was the secret she kept, that was the most impactful thing that ever happened to her life. At 4 years old, being told you're not American, you're Mexican, we're going to toss you back to Mexico. Those family histories are so important because they define who we are. And I think what the nation is now seeing is a problem in definitions, right? And I think we need to lead that rather than have other people tell us. As much as we're talking about how do we label ourselves, that was one of my issues with any word, is academics cannot define what the community is. They have to define. And I think likewise, this community needs to define itself by its family history. And this is where I think the conversations, the books are really so important. And I think, Laura, I think the issue for the Academy is to break that room open with these stories. Because what gets me is just after 50 years for me to understand that none of those rooms have been broken into. We got to do different.
Completely agree with you. Jose, I see your hand.
Yes. Can anyone in the panel discuss, there was a question earlier about colorism, and in response to Rene's point, and it hasn't been addressed, and that is, what practical advice can you give us? I mean, historically, I know that this is way back when Porfirio Diaz said, we are all Mexicans. But this is actually a very interesting intersection. I know, for example, that 10% of my blood is Native American. And if I can go and trace my ancestry for 400 years to Northeast Mexico and Texas, my ancestors directly were the first Europeans in Texas and New Mexico. But, where that happened? So I'm actually also the product of something, wanted or not. So all of this intersection of, am I enough Latino or not? I mean, I was born in Mexico, but my great-grandparents are from here. I mean, the Texas Rangers are not, or were not, our friends. You may know about King's Ranch in Texas. That was the land of one of my ancestors, but it was taken away from my other ancestors. So it's a very complex phenomenon. So for particularly the social scientists that have been studying this identity, tell us a little bit more how to deal with the practical aspects of this intersectionality.
Well, actually, we've
just
been looking
connect my iPads.
Yeah. If I can just take a couple of seconds, because we've been looking specifically at this. So as we look at the folks that came up either to New Mexico or to Coahuila, South Texas, and by the way, my wife's Menchaca, she's from Piedras Negras. So they've just done like the DNA and everything else. So they were a little bit Spanish. Juan de Oñate's wife was Isabel Moctezuma, so their kids were mestizo. You had Tlaxcaltecan Indians speaking Aztec. You had Sephardi fleeing the Inquisition. It's all there in the DNA. So that's why I keep saying, they want to know we're Indo, Afro, Oriental, Iberoamericano. But in terms of science, here is the official word on it. Are you Hispanic? You are if you say you are. Period.
Absolutely.
That's the science. That's the science.
Period.
Period. That's what it. And if you're not, you're not. Period. That's how you get into the records. Oh, we look at the use of race ethnicity in hospital records. It's amazing. It's just such quackery, this whole race and science. Complete quackery. And everybody very solemnly, yes, and Hispanic, blah, 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 blah. And we must keep the illegal immigrants out because they're bringing COVID.
I would also add that you have to spend the time to understand why people are posing questions and these questions to you. You have to just have those one-to-one conversations and say, this is how I identify. Let me explain to you why I identify this way, and ask them to acknowledge and respect you in that way. In the current culture right now, and it's happened to me, I had a trainee tell me, well, what do you know? You're white. And I was like, whoa. We're going to have to take a step back because I'm not going to allow you to tell me who I am.
Yeah.
So we're going to start right there. I'm going to allow you and ask you to share how you identify and tell me about that history. And then I'm going to do the same. But those are microaggressions. But they're microaggressions that are being thrown around because of a unstable climate that we're in right now. And it takes a lot of time. You have to be willing to sit and share and remind people that they're supposed to respect the way that you identify, allow you to be who you are and how you want to be respected. Right now, we're living in a culture that doesn't always play. And that has been my own experience with some of our learners.
I don't know if anyone's mentioned a book called The Injustice Never Leaves You. Has anyone mentioned that book? It's a phenomenal book. It's written by Monica Munoz Martinez, and it details the history of some of the occurrences in the border. One of the things that I was really shocked to learn, because we're not raised knowing these things or taught these things, and certainly not in our American school system, is that more Mexicans were lynched at the border than there were African Americans lynched in the southern states of this country. And that's not something that we talk about. We talk very little about our history in the area. But I think the more that we write our own history, the more that we know our own history, the more that we can speak to it, we can begin to unearth what seems to be invisible in this country.
Monica, that's a great point. And I wonder, JP and Ada, I know some of the panelists we just spoke with have a publication, right, in terms of how do we insert and understand how systemic racism and the history of racism is applied to Latinos. Did you, JP or Ada, or I think there were a few authors here from that publication, want to share?
Sure. And I think JP, also Deborah, right?
That's well. Yeah,
Deborah as well. I think a lot of the messaging has been shared today, and it's been that what can I say? That constant questioning, right, of identity, which I believe that JP kind of brought it home, and I say that that's anchoring, right? I think that one of the questions was, how do we face it? And the way that we face it is from the beginning to anchor, and to anchor your position. And in anchoring your position, there's always going to be the naysayers, or should I say, like Fernando say, that, those ignorance, right? You're not going to change ignorance. What you can do is you can do the best to start anchoring and start the conversation. And I think in a nutshell, that was really what we were trying to bring forth in that communication. I don't know if Deborah is still on and wants to expand, or even JP. But that was the gist of it. I mean, we were all brought in our own personal experience as to those issues of that front line and the questioning. JP, anything else on that?
I would just say that we're invisible in medical education content. The hardest workshop to find speakers for this seminar was deans of medical education. We strive to become deans of DEI, but we do not strive to become deans as much of education, GME, faculty affairs. One, that needs to change. Two, everyone on this call has an opportunity to integrate LHS Plus content into your teaching. You don't have to ask, you do it. You introduce the statistics, you introduce your data, you introduce your lived experiences, and then you write it and you publish it in Academic Medicine Medit portal. And then you do what Dr. Hayes Bautista does. When a reviewer doesn't understand, you explain it to them and you just don't accept a rejection.
I would just add that I think our job is to make that history, but also our job is to inform people in medical ed that in order for us to produce the outstanding physicians everybody says we do, they need to understand how to practice in an adverse world. And I think Rena Thomas is here. She's the Associate Dean for the Office of Diversity in Medical Education. And Stanford recently got a significant grant. And what we're going to do is change how we teach, change the issues about social justice. If you have a transplant patient and they go back to their community and you don't understand that, what's the likelihood of them succeeding in terms of being healthy? What's the likelihood of somebody with diabetes being managed if you don't understand the community? I think the reality has finally come to bear to medicine. You can't practice just 15 minutes in the office and figure that that's going to solve problems.
So thank you.
And if that's the case, then we need to change education.
Excellent. Thank you, everyone. So now
JP, we have two questions. We have Luisa and Melissa.
I know. My apologies. We have to switch into the breakout. I believe they're starting now at 9:45.
You extended it and now you want to.
It was my fault, but ask those questions to the next speaker. So on this, let's give a huge round of applause to the excellent panelists. They'll be back with us March 4th, 6th in Philadelphia with all of you for the 50th anniversary. Invitation is in the email and will be sent to you.